And there's a quote that I've used in some of my workshops. Professionals, it's not that they're able to eliminate the butterflies that you get. Mm-hmm. It's just that they've trained them to fly in formation. I think it speaks to this idea of like you just get more familiar, more comfortable, you flex that muscle and it becomes sort of normal.
Hey, welcome to a podcast where dreams meet determination and success is just around the corner. I'm your host, Suzanne Taylor-King, and I'm here to help you unlock the full potential of your business and your life. Welcome to Unlock Your Way with STK. Let's unlock your path to success together. Good morning, everyone. Suzanne Taylor-King here with another Friday episode of Unlock Your Way with STK. And we are here today with Ashely Bright, the message fixer. And I just have to tell this quick story about scrolling LinkedIn and finding this guy with the yellow glasses and the awesome LinkedIn profile when I looked at it, and starting a conversation with you was one of the easiest connections I've ever made. So thanks for being you.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful when you feel comfortable enough with someone right up front to be you. And I think we should all strive for that, but it's not always easy.
Yes. How did you get to this point, before we get into what you do and how you do it, but how did you get to that point of confidence, finding your way to that?
It's an interesting question because I have this similar conversation sometimes with others in the space. And I think a lot of it is through trial and error. There's, we don't just show up as ourselves. I know we wish we could, but it's often challenging, especially when you're in this business setting and you're online, you're in person, you're on video. And so I've just found over time, I became this brand. I became this myself, if you will. I mean, quite honestly, I still feel like there is more of me that could come forward. I do find there are moments when I'm overthinking things, if you will. But I think, the sort of the unsexy, uninteresting answer is that it just took time to kind of keep at it. I look at photos of myself on stage or in events from many years ago, and I didn't have the glasses yet, and I hadn't really figured certain things out, and it's still me, but doesn't feel like me the way I feel now. So it's interesting. I said on that point, I said this to someone a couple of weeks ago on a call. I was saying that I think in the past I showed up in a way that appeared to be very similar to what I am now in terms of open and approachable. But in retrospect, I feel like there was a bit of a facade there because I felt like that's the way I was supposed to be. Whereas now I think through the years of being an entrepreneur and kind of growing into this, it's hard to see a distinction, but I know there's a distinction because now I feel like I'm truly showing up and being authentic to who I am versus feeling like, well, I kind of think I'm supposed to be this way. I'm supposed to be that or this. So there's an authenticity that, again, takes time to get to.
Yeah, I love that because as you grow as an entrepreneur, I think you become more comfortable being uncomfortable, if that makes sense. So if something challenges you, or I have many clients who are nervous about video or doing a live conversation like this can make some people like, oh, really? Oh, that's
a retake. Wait, can I do that again?
Yeah, no, you can't. Yeah, relax. We could edit it out on the future podcast episode, but
it's out there in the world.
Yeah, but I feel like organic conversations, I've always been good at that in real life. So why not take that online and, show people how easy it is? And, I think connecting with others as yourself, the way you do, and then your branding that now goes with your personality, I can see that as an evolutionary process for sure.
Yes, I mean, as an entrepreneur, it's very common to have to do those things that are uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And the trick, and I won't say that I've mastered it by any means, but is being self-aware to kind of recognize those moments. And, you want to prepare, you want to make sure you're ready as best you can, but there's also that element of unknown that you just kind of have to lean into it
Yeah.
and know that I think a lot of it comes down to intent. And so, like for myself, when I'm getting up on stage or getting on video, or for my clients when they're about to get up on stage, it often is this worry about me, like, oh, it's all about me. It's all about
Oh my
me. And I often try and change that focus to say, no, you're there to connect and add value. Your intent is to engage and share something worthy or valuable to this group. And so I like to sort of have that mind shift to take it off of me and just say, hey, I'm just here to help. I'm here to
God.
share some insight. And hopefully that over time starts to minimize that fear or anxiety around, at least in that type of a setting, that fear of like, oh my God, they're going to judge me. Oh, am I going to deliver value? Oh, they're not going to understand me. Imposter syndrome. Let's talk about that. That's a whole other topic, but
Yeah.
yeah. So leaning in, and it's interesting because as confident as I sometimes I believe I come across and I hope I come across, there's always that fear. There's always that anxiety. And there's a quote that I've used in some of my workshops, and it's attributed to a whole bunch of different people. But essentially it says that professionals, it's not that they're able to eliminate the butterflies that you get. It's just that they've trained them to fly in formation.
Oh, that's good.
And I've always loved that because I think it speaks to this idea of like you just get more familiar, more comfortable, you flex that muscle and it becomes sort of normal. But there's always that nervous energy and that kind of anxiety that you kind of just got to get in formation, if you will.
I love that because I'm remembering you instantly gave me a flashback to my very first paid speaking gig. And I arrived there and saw the other speakers in the lineup, and they were all doctors. I was the only one that wasn't a doctor. And I thought it was a supplement conference. And I was speaking about brain and positivity and all of that. And I thought, oh, I'm changing my talk. Like right now, I'm changing my talk. And, I'm talking to myself in my own head, like, what are you, crazy? You prepared for this talk. You have note cards, you have slides. And I'm like, no, out the window. If all the other speakers are doctors, it's going to be scientific and dry. And I'll dare say, most of them were a little boring, didn't know how to engage an audience, were used to speaking at medical conferences, right? I thought, this is my chance in my red leather pants to be different and bold and make the audience laugh, have them stand up and get engaged. And I was so inspired, nervous, very nervous, but truly inspired to throw away the note cards. And to this day, never used note cards for that very reason, allowing the audience to kind of inspire where the information goes.
That's great. I mean, that's bold. And I mean, come on, like there's a line there, this is my chance at red leather pants. Like that's a quotable moment right there. But that's brave, but that's where the growth happens. To have those moments of uncertainty and then shift to a place of ultimately triumph or opportunity. And that's one of the things too, when I talk about like public speaking, is that inherently your body is trying to protect you. That's where that anxiety, that fear, all those things that happen when you're up on stage come from. But the other side of it is that if you are to channel those into excitement about this opportunity to add value or engage or get new customers or whatever that is for you, that becomes fuel. And as long as you kind of own that, and again, it's mind shift. We've talked about this a couple times, that mindset change because your body's going to give you that energy. You can have no coffee, having not slept for 3 days, and your body you'll be wired because your body's like, you're all going to die. We need to run. So it gives you all this energy and you're like, all right, I acknowledge. Now I must channel this into being excited and engaged. Because the other thing is, and you know this, that your audience will mirror your behavior and the way you are showing up. And so if you are there and you are excited and you are, you know, whether you're doing this with your hands or not, they will mirror that back to you. And so that confidence is so powerful.
And I wonder, so now I'm curious about some of the things and I'd love your opinion on this. In the past, as a coach, you know, I've been a coach for like 16 years. So obviously I've had lots of coaching programs. I've had lots of offers out there in the world. My most successful offers have been the ones based on work I've done myself. And through some kind of introspection, I realize it's the way I sell it is different. I'm more excited about the transformations that I've achieved, and I want those for other people. And it's like an effortless sale. And I'm wondering if that has to do with the way the message is more personal because, you know, it was me that did it. And I see this for you too.
Yeah, well, I saw this the other day, actually. Sarah Blakely had it on a coffee mug in one of her Instagram photos, but it said, I'm trying to remember it now. Without pain, there is no story. And it's very, you know, important to think about that as it relates to what you just said, you know, whether you are talking about yourself in a program, whether you were talking about an experience you had and sharing that on stage, when it's something you've legitimately experienced and had that transformation. And when we say pain, it varies for everybody, but the idea is that, you know, maybe you were the red leather pants getting on stage, like that's a moment of fear and anxiety, and you feel it kind of in your gut. And then you transform through that experience to learn something and grow. And so it comes back to you authentically now as you share it, because you're not having to sort of like, well, what are my bullet points and what are the things I need to hit? You're just coming forward. And so I think whether you're talking about a story or you're talking about something that you're teaching, a methodology or a framework that's rooted in those experiences, that's where that authenticity comes from. And the challenge is, from a public speaking standpoint, this is something I hear many times from my clients is, well, I don't really have a story that fits that, or I don't really know if my experience is relevant. And oftentimes it's absolutely relevant and invaluable. But the where I come in is help them identify that in their experience and bring it forward and say, yes, this is applicable to this business setting, this presentation, this meeting, but then put a little bit of structure around it so that it's clear in their own mind. And that's where that work comes in to develop it. But again, it's rooted in an authentic experience you've had. All we're doing is helping shape it a little bit. And so that when you get out there, you know, kind of like, well, there's these 5 points that articulate this story or this experience. And I just need to make sure I hit those. And each time I share that, it's going to be a little different because it's coming off as it's authentic. It's honest. Yeah. And so I'm not scripting it. I'm not reading from a script in my head. I am just sharing a story and or an experience. And that's where, you know, I often say that when I work with clients, I'm really just kind of adjusting some dials. You have the knowledge, you have the experience, you have the things that are valuable to share, but I'm just going to help adjust a few things so that it connects in the right way that you want it to, and it puts people sort of in the right frame of mind and the right mood to continue that momentum of the conversation.
I love this so much because it's so in line with an activity that I have so many of my clients do who don't see the value in stories. And they often ask, Suzanne, where do you come up with all these stories? Well, I mean, they're all true, but I've worked on what stories are relevant, in the business world, and they're in a notebook. And I bullet pointed the stories, like exactly what you said. I forget who I learned it from. A public speaking coach, like years ago, said to come up with 25 or 30 stories from throughout your life and bullet point them, just so you don't want to script, because then the story sounds the same and robotic like every single time. And I have noticed such an increase in engagement with other people because I have that ability.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a great rapport builder too.
It is. And that's the thing, is I think when I hear someone, a client say, well, I'm not sure I have a story, or I don't know what the story is. Mm-hmm. It's oftentimes, our minds and our bodies are these repositories for everything that's happened. It's this archive of everything that's happened. And so sometimes it is really like taking a moment, either to your point, keeping a record of these experiences as they're happening and having that self-awareness, which many of us don't, and that's understandable. But then the next thing is, well, okay, can we sit down and either think and talk and work through, and you identify these things? I remember a number of years ago, I spoke at a design conference, and leading up to it, I shared, I don't remember whether it was 10 or 20, but every day leading up to the conference, I shared a story of my experience working in the design industry as a creative director and an art director. And it was an interesting exercise because I put it out there before I'd really cataloged these stories. And so there's a little bit of pressure on me to remember them, but I knew they were there. And then I made a conscious effort leading up to those days of jotting them down. And they're all back there. It's just that, obviously they're not top of mind. Mm-hmm. And similar to what you just described, I would put down some very basic points just to remember, oh, yes, I remember that moment happened. And then the client said this, and that was really funny, or whatever it was. And then many times I would kind of take a quick look at it and kind of frame it in my mind just very briefly, and then jump on the camera on my phone while I was walking the dog or something and share that story. Mm-hmm. And so it was rooted in an honest experience, an authentic moment I had. But there was a candid quality to it because I didn't have it all scripted or rehearsed. And we all have that ability. We all, I joke that if you've made it past birth, you have stories to tell. Yeah. So there's something in there, and all human experiences are connected and relatable. And so it doesn't matter whether it's something that happened in Little League when you were 6. There's something valuable there that you can relate to, either your experience now as a business leader, or you can create an opportunity for someone on your team or someone in your audience to see themselves in that experience. And it's an opportunity for them to realize that, like, oh, it's okay to struggle. And then to have that realization and that overcome that challenge. Mm. And that's really what it is. We talked about, it's about pain that you then go through, which creates a transformation in who you are. And that's the story. And that's where you learn. And so if you think about that's every day. And there's so many of those for people, those moments. And they don't have to be these giant sort of illustrative experiences. It can be, just a little experience, that moment. You're like, oh my God, that hit.
Well, I remember I love telling funny stories. There's something, at least for me, about making other people laugh. That's just one of the joys of life. And I remember being, in high school and wanting to move to New York City to be on Saturday Night Live. And my mom said, you can't do that. Like, there's no way you're going to. And I thought, now I think back, and I think I totally could have done that. Mm. And there's a couple other really funny stories I have from my dental career, which I won't tell because they're really funny. And, some of them are off color. So, you have to know when the right story is appropriate and with the right person. Right. And how do you How do you determine that? If you're looking for a story to help with someone's leadership or thought leadership or online presence or getting them more speaking gigs even, how do you find that story? Is it about connecting with the audience? What does that really look like in your process?
Well, so one of the things that I always talk about when it comes to finding those stories, especially in that scenario I just mentioned where someone says, well, I don't really know what stories I've got. I'm not sure what relates. Oftentimes what I'll do is I'll say, well, let's go back to the first. And so that's a good place to start. And we talk about like people, places, nouns, experiences. And so if we start thinking about things like, you know, the first day of college, or the first trip you went on, or a first date, or your first car when you got your driver's license, like those become rich territory to start to mine stories. And at this point, these may not be applicable yet, but the idea is you're starting to remember those moments. Oh God, I remember that. In fact, as I said, you know, getting your first, your car and your license, I'm remembering, I'm all of a sudden remembering a story of learning to drive a manual car and blowing 5 stoplights at an intersection where everyone could see me. My friends were in the back of the car and it was incredibly embarrassing, but like that was a long time ago. And I always remember that.
Yeah.
But so part of the process is first of all, identifying those. And so I often say, find those first, you know, whatever those are, that becomes rich territory. And then from there, you know, to your point, you kind of jot them down and it can be just very quick. And then what you're doing is you'll start to, and I find this with my clients through that natural kind of curiosity that I have in asking questions, you can tell certain stories kind of rise to the top in terms of that impact they had on the client or the person you're speaking with. And so you start to, oh, those 3 right there, those feel like they're, and from there, you can then start to connect. Yeah. So for example, if a client is, you know, in a leadership position, and I kind of touched on this before, but oftentimes in those positions, you're talking about overcoming a challenge, adopting a new protocol in the way we run the organization, or learning new skills, or dealing in the face of what might be considered failure. You know, we launched something, it didn't work. We're all feeling the downside of that, and we're kind of down on ourselves as a group or an organization, right? Those things, you can all connect that to an experience that you had in those stories, because they're all, you know, whether you're talking about a business setting and a company and a professional moment, it's still rooted in like, well, failure, frustration, fear, anxiety, uncertainty. Well, all of those things can be related to learning to play t-ball as a little kid, learning to ride a bike, a first date, or learning to drive a standard vehicle. You know, that moment of I felt a little bit like I was on stage. I'm in a public setting. There's people around the intersection watching this. There's people behind honking at me. My friends are in the back of the car laughing, and I'm just desperately trying to get the clutch gas as the lights keep changing. And so I
can feel that story because that happened to me too.
Absolutely. And right there is the power of an authentic experience story, is that other people, whether they can directly go, oh my God, I know exactly what you mean in terms of learning to drive a standard car, or they can relate it to something else where they're just like, because that feeling comes up, and it's the kind of that it's sort of this energy from within where you're like, oh my God, I remember that was so embarrassing, or that I
remember my dad yelling at me to feel the car, feel the engine.
And you were probably at that moment, as I'm sure I was, in your head thinking very logically, okay, gas, glass, you know, like there wasn't any feeling or intuition. It was just very intellectual. Yes.
And I love that. I love the commonality of that. So stories that could make your audience or your readers feel like, ooh, me too. I resonate with that. What other kind of stories should we tell?
Well, I mean, there's, stories are this broad category because I mentioned uncertainty and fear and overcoming anxiety. And those are kind of the moments or the feelings that you have. But the story that related to that or created that feeling, as you said, those can come from all over the place. So it's a little hard to kind of say what type of a story would be the right fit. Now, sorry, going back to your original question, it just kind of popped back in my head. You have to be aware, obviously, of your audience and the setting and the context. And oftentimes when we're talking about leadership, there's value and real importance to building trust with your audience, being transparent and having a level of vulnerability, because that's where you're going to let, as you just had that experience where you were feeling, you're remembering that moment that you had learning to drive, and it was related to what I was sharing. And so it's important to find that connection. But obviously in a position of leadership in a professional setting, you don't want it to be too much. You don't want it to be sort of an overshare or a Debbie Downer moment, right? And so again, it doesn't mean that you can't use a whole variety of different stories and experiences you've had. It just might be the level of detail that you go to. And so I'm not going to share the story, but I'll share the moment. I was on a call the other day. I'm part of a group called the Iron Tribe. And it's a group of men. We meet every Wednesday on a call. And it's very much about sharing kind of those universal experiences, those challenges, uncertainties, things like that. And I was in a breakout room with two people. And I was very candid about something that was going on that day, something I was feeling, something that was really kind of weighing me down. And I shared, very particular, very specific details with them. And then when we got out of the break room, the group, one of the people in that said, well, Ashely shared something that was really, I think, really valuable to, if everyone, Ashely, if you're willing to share it with the group. And so I reshared it, but I did it in a way that I wasn't giving away too much, but I was giving away the essence of the learning from that. And so I thought it was a good kind of on the fly example. And it was self-preservation because I was, it was something personal to me. But I think it's a great way to think about how you can share a story in a leadership setting and just be aware that, like, okay, I know I don't want to go too far. And that's why it's important to do the exercises that I've talked about and that you've talked about, whether it's like recording the stories, jotting down some key moments. And then if you are thinking about, hey, I think this might be applicable to this presentation I'm going to give or this meeting I'm going to run. It's important to kind of vet that a little bit with yourself. Just kind of make sure, because you don't, people that are sort of off the cuff and share a story, there's a couple problems. One, if you don't structure it the right way, it just doesn't really connect. So that's problematic. But then if you haven't shared it before, you haven't really done a little work, you got to be careful, but you might get caught up in it and it can like do the opposite of what you want. And people go, ooh, that was uncomfortable. I'm not sure if I want to be in this room right now.
Well,
and that's what you want to avoid.
That. We've all been through, whether it's virtually or in person, somebody taking too long to tell a story, somebody not getting to the point of the story. Like, how does that relate to what we were talking about? Or oversharing in a business situation. And so all of those things can be solved with a little bit of practice and self-awareness, that self-awareness piece. And I think that's one of the hardest things to do as an entrepreneur is, be outside of yourself and really look at what you're doing and look at how you're sharing and what you're saying. How do you recommend getting better at that?
Well, I think it's like so many things that I often think about. I mean, there's so many parallels I find with working out and health and wellness. And when I say parallels, I mean with being an entrepreneur, being a leader, etc. And a lot of that comes down to, as you're working out, you're learning a new exercise, let's say. And so it may be that, like, first of all, you identify like, well, I really want to improve X. And so maybe you go out on YouTube or you go on Instagram or something and you learn, oh, this is a new technique or a new whatever it is. And so it's that process of research and investigation. And then you start to integrate that to your workout. And so you may try it, and the first time it's maybe a little awkward and your form isn't quite right and you don't have the right weight. And so it's sort of, there's an uncomfortableness to it. But over time, you start to kind of get in the flow, and it works. You know what weight it is and where does it fit in the course of your workout that day. And so eventually it just becomes, like it's a muscle you flex. It's integrated. And I think that's very true of so many things in business and in life. But I think especially when it comes to public speaking, communication, storytelling, it's that process of saying, okay, here's what I'm trying to get to. I've got this moment on stage. I'm going to be on this video. I'm going to be interviewed, and I need to have some things to share. And so going back to that process, like identify it. Okay, those are some interesting stories. Oh, these ones really kind of rise to the top for whatever reason. I feel them. And then similar to what I just described with the working out, okay, we're going to, first of all, identify it. We're going to start to integrate it. And so we'll do a little sort of practicing and rehearsing, and kind of we'll share that story. Okay, here's some ways we can tweak this and adjust this. And we don't need a lot of that setup. I think it's unnecessary. And this is where I'm coming in. I'm being that coach. I'm being that person that's helping kind of bounce those ideas for my clients. And what we're doing through that process is getting to kind of the clarity of that story. Like, what are the most important points? Because one of the things when we talk about stories is you need to have an authentic emotion. You need to have specific details. You need to have a moment in time. And the reason you have those things is because the authentic emotion is obviously something that you want your audience to feel. Just the way you could feel that moment of learning to drive that I just described. You could feel that. And so that's where that authentic emotion comes in. And then having those specific details are important because it starts to create a mental picture for who's listening. And so when you start to bring those pieces together in a story, the point is that you don't have a big, long setup and people didn't get it or they can't relate and you missed the punchline and you didn't have that emotion. But through this process, the idea is like we hit on those really succinctly so that and this is where I was actually in a workshop with a friend of mine last week, and we were talking about comedians when they go up on stage or when they're writing their routine. He was referencing sometimes you'll literally, whether literally or figuratively, you kind of put sort of 5 words on your hand, and those are kind of your triggers to remember that story or that punchline or that arc of the show. Yeah. And similarly, what we're going to do is we'll identify the story. We'll figure out which ones resonate. We do some of that writing and rehearsing. Okay, here's the authentic emotion. We need to hit on that. And then there was that detail about the fluorescent light, kind of flickering. That's something we can all relate to. And so there's a strategic quality to then crafting that story. And then once we've done that, then it becomes sort of the opposite. Now we're kind of simplifying it. So it might come down to one word, like learning to drive or statement, learning to drive, or in my case, Volkswagen Bug, because that was the car I had. And so that might be enough if I'm...
Stop.
I did. Yes.
Me too.
There you go.
My dad had a Kelly Green Volkswagen Bug. It was a 67 Volkswagen Bug. It was his little dream car, and that's what he told me to drive.
I'm gonna blow your mind here because I'm pretty sure, I'm trying to remember, the Volkswagen I had, Volkswagen Bug, I'm pretty sure it was a 67. It was a 67, but it was like flat white. I think it had been primed and then never painted.
Okay.
So, but there you go, 67.
Yes.
Volkswagen Bug.
And this car, my dad had it forever because I'm learning to drive in 82, and it was his baby. Kept it in the garage, and it got stolen right before I got my driver's license, and I was devastated.
Wow, that sucks.
It did. It did. Probably a dune buggy somewhere.
There you go.
That's incredible that we learned to drive a stick shift in the same type of car.
Exactly. And it's funny to now sort of bring it. I know we've gone completely off track on where he's going, but
sorry, I had to. That was incredible. Incredible.
To bring it sort of back around, my son, who's my oldest, is 17. And he, for the last year, he's just been absolutely like consumed with cars and what about this car and what about that car? And it's funny because last night he was like, what about this? This is really cool. And I think it was maybe a 68 Volkswagen Bug, but it was all nice and cleaned up and stuff like that. And I said, I love it, but it's a tin can. You cannot get that car. Because of course now versus, in the 80s when we were learning to drive, vehicles are much bigger now. And so the idea of getting it a Volkswagen Bug, especially for my son, I might be able to let him get away with it, but my wife, no way. That thing needs airbags. It needs anti-lock brakes. It needs all of those things.
Yes.
I could at least say, hey, we didn't know any better. These things didn't exist. You just drove whatever you had.
Was there even seatbelts? I'm not sure.
I'm pretty sure there were seatbelts, but that was about the extent of it. There was, I don't even think it had like headrests for the back of your head when you were driving. So
no. And you know what I love about this commonality of stories is this is a perfect example of how stories can connect people. Like I already knew I liked you and I already knew we had rapport, but now to find a thread that's similar between that, and you can do that with an audience, that's absolutely incredible testament to what you do.
Thank you. And that's, right there, as you highlighted, that is the power of having those moments. And that's why, I've in the past, I've done a few talks on mastering the art of conversation. And so, for example, in networking events and business settings where you're not up on stage, you're not the focus of attention, and doing exactly what we just did, where if you go in and the first thing is like, well, what do you do? What's your business? What's your industry? Like everyone's talking about that. But if you go in and say something like, wow, nice to meet you. Like, what have you been working on this week? Or what's got you excited about, what's going on in the world? Or even like, hey, I just got here. Like, was there a good talk? Like, what talk did you like? Because what you're doing is you're now making it not, you're not coming in for the pitch slap, like trying to sell something. You're not coming in with the scripted kind of like, upsell. Or the boring, I do this. But you're actually creating a moment where you guys can engage on something outside of that and learn something about them. When they, the example of like, well, I got here late. Like, what talks have you seen? What resonated? Oh, and you've immediately learned something about that individual. And you maybe, as we just had here, there's an opportunity to connect. They mentioned something, you're like, oh my God, I just did that last week. Like I've never done it before, and now you're having a whole conversation and you're not talking about, what do you guys do and what's your industry and no. So yeah, there you go. That's the on the fly, the power of storytelling and authenticity and connecting.
I love it. And my final question, which is related to storytelling, having different versions of a story, whether it's, short, medium, long, more detailed, more emotional, what does that look like from your opinion?
So I've described this process in a very few different ways, but you've identified the story, you've started to kind of write it out and craft it and figure out what works and what doesn't. And then you go into a process of what I often, it's just bullet pointing it. And so from that, you then go into the next stage, which is starting to think about, okay, if I have 30 seconds, what's that story? If I have 3 minutes, what's that story? And it's about that level of detail and maybe how you set it up. And it's just as I described with the working out, it's sort of identifying it, integrating it, and then kind of fine tuning it, if you will. And it's really important for, I just sort of talked about pitch slapping and things like that, but having that sort of quote unquote elevator pitch. So when someone says, hey, Bob, can you come in? We got I've got such and such here. I just thought he should meet you, boom. Can you share the most valuable part in 30 seconds? Or, hey, why don't you join us? We got about 10 minutes left on our meeting. I'd love for you to share what you're working on in this new quarter, this new project. So, okay, great. I can set it up. I can spend a little more time. I can, spend 5 minutes or 8 minutes. And so it's really important to have that level of understanding and clarity. And this is where oftentimes I work with a lot of technology companies and a lot of leaders in the technology space, which it can be very convoluted. Talking about technology can be overwhelming and that kind of thing. And I'll often have clients, they're like, I don't really know what to say. And so they will double down on what they know. This is survival. This is natural. So if you haven't, for example, identified, hey, I've got 3 great stories that I can tell. One of them is about a personal experience I had. One of them is about a customer experience with my product. And another one is about, someone on my team, let's say. If I haven't, as someone who's up there speaking or leading a meeting, or say, for example, going out to meet with investors, which is a lot of the clients I work with. If I haven't done the work ahead of time to know those stories exist, first of all, and then I've crafted them a little bit, then when I get up there, I'm a deer in the headlights, I'm uncertain. And so what do? I start talking about my technology because I know it backwards and forwards. And that's what I'm going to do. The problem is that if I'm talking to someone who isn't steeped in that industry, who isn't steeped in that technology, I'm immediately creating a distance between them. I'm not connecting. They don't understand. They may feel like, oh, gee, I feel stupid. I don't understand what he's talking about, but he keeps talking about it like I should. And so it can be it can do the exact opposite of what you want. And oftentimes that's born out of fear and anxiety that the person speaking has. It's sort of this weird sort of escalation where you're saying, I don't feel like it's resonating with them. Maybe I need to give them more detail.
Let me use more jargon.
Meanwhile, the person listening is going, I don't really understand. I feel kind of stupid. I don't get it. Like I need to back away from this conversation or this experience. And so my point is that if you have done the work to say, well, I know that these 3 stories resonate, then I know how to share them in a 30-second, a 2-minute, whatever. That's where that confidence comes in, because now I can get up there and I know, hey, if someone asks a question, I can share the story of a customer and how they benefited. If someone has a question about my commitment to this company or this purpose or what I'm talking about, I can share that story that I had from Little League where I learned this valuable lesson. And that's what set me on the course to start this company. Those are the things that are going to start to build your confidence and allow you to come across confidently and authoritatively, but also connect and build trust with your listener. And I often say that listener because they could be on video, they could be on a podcast, they could be out in a vast audience, a sea of people. But that's the key is being able to articulate it in a way that you know it, they can feel it. It helps move your conversation further down the road in terms of your goal for that conversation. And sorry, I've lost the train of thought on where the original question was, but that's the goal there in terms of how you integrate the stories and the value of that preparation, that work. I referred to them on a past call with someone. I said strategic storytelling, and one of the listeners commented. They said, strategic storytelling sounds like it's maybe a little contrived. And I said, well, it's not. The story is still rooted in an authentic experience, so it's not a false story or a made up story. Right. But there is a strategic element to it. And I would argue that, we think of strategy in business. So it's obviously got a real applicable there. But I would argue that any good storyteller, your uncle sitting around a campfire telling you a story, they have in their own way made it a strategic story because they've probably told it a number of times. And each time they know, to your point, like that's the line that makes everyone laugh. That's the line that makes everyone go, oh my God, I had that experience too. And so you naturally will go, well, that worked last time. I'm going to keep that in. And that's where I talk about strategic storytelling. It's still authentic. It's still honest, but it's done in a way that, we talked about comedians earlier. I mean, comedians rehearse, they refine, they test, they tweak, they adjust. So they know exactly where that line's going to hit and how that laugh moment relates to the next moment, and they build up momentum. And the really great ones will then tie it back, 20 minutes later to something that happened in the beginning. And that gets the biggest laugh of all because they've tied the whole thing together.
Yeah.
And,
I love when that happens so much. I told a story, it was a month or so ago at a networking event. I was the speaker and I only had 8 minutes. So I basically take my hour-long talk and condense it into 5 minutes, right? And then I finish with a story that encompasses the 3 things I was talking about. And it's really funny. And I started to notice, it's probably the 4th or 5th time I've told that story publicly. Mm-hmm. And I started to notice the line that gets the laugh. Like, it's not the whole story is funny, but there's a line where I say something in the story, and that's when everybody smiles and laughs. Yep. So what if I started with that line and then told the story? And it worked just beautifully. It was all from just practice and trying it. And, that's the thing that's funny. So I love
we're talking about business and businesses, there's optimization, right? And there's optimization in all facets of what you're doing. And there's optimization or strategic storytelling in the way you share something.
Yeah.
Because if you know it's a great story and you share it and it kind of doesn't really resonate and it doesn't get the effect you wanted, then okay, just like everything else in business, there's an opportunity to, let's refine. Into your example, it's like, okay, let's move this line here and I'll try that. Oh, that hit. Okay, so I know that there's something there. It's interesting you said that you kind of took a longer format and condensed it. I was on a call the other day with a potential client, and she was sharing that there's a talk she gave, and it's a particular format, which I've presented with, called the Ignite format. And essentially it's a 5-minute, I think it's 20 slides, and each slide is 15 seconds or something like that. But the idea is that you don't control the slides advancing. They advance automatically. And you're now taking, and you're having to then just roll with it. And so the ability to really have a well-crafted and well-timed delivery is important. And what was interesting, so going through this process is a challenge. I did exactly the same thing for a talk I gave in April, where I took a 45-minute talk and condensed it down to this 5 minutes with this format. And it very much was like a comedy routine to an extent, because each line really has to matter, because I don't have any wasted, I can't sort of add an extra minute or so.
Yes.
And what was interesting, this is going back, so she went through this process for herself and said, it's the best version of the talk I've delivered. And I think it's because it forced her, and it forced me in my experience, to strip away anything that wasn't really critical. And so you got right down to like, well, this is the line that gets the laugh. This is the line that gets the cry. This is the line that gets them clapping, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it's a great metaphor, a great way to think about, as we talked about many times, storytelling or communication in general. That, I could tell you the whole story of the Learning to Drive manual. I could tell that 10 different ways. And each way I tell it's going to resonate in a different way. And so I'm naturally going to want to kind of like figure out the right one, the most succinct, the one that hits the right way. And that's the one I will continue to share.
Yeah.
And so that's really that power of learning to tell stories strategically and learning to optimize those in a way that really helps just, build that trust, get those moments of engagement, have that feeling at the right moment. Yeah. And, the other thing I say is that oftentimes the presentation, the story, whatever you're sharing is a stepping stone to something more that you want to do. So in many cases of my clients, they're looking to get investment so they can create the product, build the company, and ultimately have it go out in the market and have an impact. And so to me, it's like, this is a stepping stone. I want to get up on stage and share this, and I want to be able to get the result of a new customer, an investment, a partnership, whatever. And so that's very much why, it is strategic.
Yeah.
It's all a piece of the strategic offering in order to get to my goal. And for me, one of the things I love about working with many of the clients that I do is they're doing really interesting things that are bringing a lot of real value and positive impact to the community and to the world, whether it's through a product or through a service. And that's what I love is, can I help you adjust a few dials in how you communicate so that you can get the result you need from that conversation, most importantly, and then have that impact. And this is a way, sort of to bring it full circle, this is a way that I have, over the last 10 years in my business, tried to sort of, I don't want to say redeem myself. That's the wrong way to think about it, but know that I'm adding value.
That ripple effect. Yeah,
exactly. I'm not just, and I say, when I joke about redeeming myself, I was a creative director for many years, and nothing against creative directors, but I often in retrospect felt like I helped Microsoft sell stuff. I helped Amazon sell stuff. No one was living and dying by what I did. It wasn't critical. And so what I've tried to do is really align myself with, interesting clients that are in an interesting space, that are doing challenging things and dealing with things that will really be transformative and beneficial. And so ultimately they're having impact. And that's what I do. And that's what I love. And as you know, I have a podcast called the Impact Tribe Live, where I'm showcasing people that are having an impact. And that's what I want. It's about getting that result, bringing that value. And it's why I host workshops. It's why I do a lot of what I do.
Yeah. It's totally apparent that you love what you do. And through this conversation, I now have such a clear picture, even more than before, of what you do and how you do it and why you do it, which that's what you want when you're having a conversation or you're on a podcast or you're delivering a talk. That's what you want. And thank you for that. Thank you for being so good at that piece of it. Now,
I was going to say thank you for the opportunity, first of all.
You're so welcome. I
appreciate it.
You're so welcome. I'd love to know your favorite client story.
Oh, wow. Well, I had a client a number of years ago, very typical for me. He was or is an individual, very, very smart, very technically savvy. And he this was his third company that he was building. He'd been quite successful by all measures. And he was working in a space that was technology, but it related to the healthcare field. And what was really interesting is he was having a lot of the classic challenges where he knew his technology, he knew his business, he knew his industry, but he was struggling to get engagement from the investors that he needed. And he'd been at it for 5-6 months, doing kind of the rounds, trying to get investment. And we met, fortunately, and started chatting. And he already had a presentation. He had all these things put together. And what we did was we worked together to do a lot of what I just described, helping him clarify some really key stories, helping him also simplify a lot of the messages and things he was communicating. Because in this case, he was pitching to angel investors versus institutional investors.
Okay.
And so for them, it's much more of a human experience. They want to understand the technology. Yeah. Exactly. And we were able to sort of fine tune some things, adjust some things. We did a lot of what I've just talked about over the last hour. And I was so proud of the fact, because he's a great guy, and he was working on this because it was a technology and a platform that was going to directly benefit his own parents and 20 million plus people that were exactly in the same situation. And so it was not only valuable and a great business opportunity for investors, but it was very much rooted in a personal experience and helping his family and that kind of thing. And so through that process of helping him refine these things, within 2 weeks of us kind of completing the work that we were doing on this, he went out, presented it, and he got a $250,000 investment.
Amazing.
And that was after 6 months of struggling. Within 2 weeks, he got that. And so fortunately, I've had other clients that have had similar experiences and breakthroughs, which I'm so proud of. But that was one in particular because he was just a very interesting character and what he was doing and his parents and the whole thing. And I just love that it was, within 2 weeks, he got it. And that was the money he needed to hire some key people to start to build out the platform. And as I said earlier, it led to then that product coming into market and having the impact that he wanted to have. And that, to me, is the arc that I love, and not only did he get that funding and create this product, but now he has that skill set to be able to identify those stories and share it in the right way and get that engagement from people. So
beautiful.
There you go.
Love it. Love it. How can my listeners get in touch with you?
So I'm on all the platforms. Search for the hashtag #TheMessageFixer. So I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on YouTube, I'm all those places. YouTube, you can go and learn. There's lots of tutorials and tips and videos there.
They're great, by the way.
Thank you. I also, I'm going to I host workshops probably every month on different topics.
Oh, does that mean
I've got one coming up?
Do you want to host a workshop for my community?
I would love to do that. I'm all about more people, the better. We all need to learn how to communicate. Yes. And so I'm actually hosting a workshop next week on the 24th, which is available if you go to my website, themessagefixer.com. It's right there on the homepage. And I would love it. Anyone who wants to jump in, please do. Yeah. But I host them every month, and different topics: storytelling, overcoming resistance, stage fright, how to craft a story, things like that. And I just get absolutely jazzed. Yeah. Seeing that, and I know we're getting close to our time here. I guess this is good. We didn't have to cut it early. Give you the
Well, it's so nice to have a conversation and not have to cut it off early. So
thank you. I'll very quickly. So I had an experience. I was given the opportunity. This is in 2008 to host a workshop at a design school up in Seattle. A friend of mine ran, and it was on public speaking and communication. I'd never taught that topic before. In fact, I'd never taught before. And I remember in that moment, first of all, I had to reverse engineer a lot of what I did intuitively in order to be able to share it with the group. And I'll never forget seeing that. It was like the light bulb went off for the participants in the workshop, because suddenly they were seeing clarity of how they could share an idea, how they could overcome an obstacle that was in the way of their idea. And these were individuals from all different industries, all different levels within their organizations. And that was a long time ago. And that planted that seed that, like, wow, I love this. Seeing that transformation happen, seeing that empowerment happen. And that's fueled me to this day, through all the challenges of being an entrepreneur, but that's fueled me to this day, is seeing that aha moment for people where they kind of transform and get that clarity. So
yeah, I love it. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the stories and the tips and all the juicy nuggets that you dropped on how we can be better at telling stories and sharing stories that are relevant to our business. It's so, so important. Entrepreneurs do that and be that and stand in that. So thank you for doing what you do. And thanks for being here today.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I love your energy. I mean, when we had our first connection call, it was evident. There was no uncomfortable pauses. Yeah. And so I appreciate you inviting me back to share this with your audience. And I appreciate you and I appreciate them. And so thank you again for the opportunity.
You're so welcome. It's such a powerful reminder that when you're reaching out to people for connection, for referral partners, for potential clients, whatever reason you're reaching out to people, trust your gut, be yourself, and just do it. And sometimes you get lucky and meet an Ashely and you learn to drive in the same car. Just saying.
Yeah, there you go. I love it. I love it. 1967 Volkswagen Bug.
Yeah.
For the win.
for the win. I'm going to go see if I can find a picture of that car right now, and I'll send it to you. Have a great day, everyone. And Ashely, thanks again so much for joining me.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another empowering episode of Unlock Your Way. I hope you found today's discussion inspiring and you're ready to take your business and personal growth to that next level. If you're feeling as fired up as I am and eager to unlock that full potential, I'm here to help you on your journey and provide that personalized guidance tailored to your unique goals and challenges. Simply book a one-on-one coaching call with me and we'll dive deep into your business aspirations and see how we could co-create a roadmap for your success. And whether you're striving to scale an enterprise or just getting started, I'm here to support you every step of the way. To schedule your coaching call, simply visit the website at unlockyourwaywithstk.com, click the call button, and we'll turn your dreams into that reality. Subscribe and review on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. Plus, you can join over 800 entrepreneurs in the Idea Lab Facebook group. Let's make success as an entrepreneur happen together. Until next time, I'm STK. Keep dreaming big, stay focused, and most of all, have fun while you're doing it.